Now, on today's episode of Fix My Firm, we're going to be talking about the topic called KPIs because a lot of law firms ask this question, and we're going to talk through some specific questions and scenarios that people have asked about. So I brought my screen with me so to make sure I do not forget your questions. So the first thing that I want to explain is when it comes down to KPIs, many people are confused on what is that? What does that mean? One way to think about it is like this. A KPI is literally a key performance indicator. It is giving you some type of indication about how something is performing. Now, one of the best ways to really break down and understand any type of finance concept is to think about it related to something you are already familiar with. So one thing you may be familiar with is riding in a vehicle. So if you think about it this way, if you've ever gone on a road trip or you've ever driven or you've been in the passenger seat or the back seat, there's a couple of things you tend to pay attention to. And there are going to be some things that are internal KPIs and some things that are going to be external. So some of the internal things might be, what is the temperature in the car? Like, you want to think about that. You also want to think about, like, how fast is the car driving? That will give you an idea on how fast the vehicle is moving. And then you also want to think about things like, what is the fuel level? Because you don't want to be on a long trip and completely ignore those types of things, because those things will give you some type of indication about how fast you're moving, how the temperature feels in the car, and it'll also give you an idea on, do you have enough fuel to make it to your destination? Now, some of the external factors might be like the road signs or the mile markers. They're going to help you understand how far away are you from your destination. And then other very important ones are things like the speed limit, because they're going to help you understand how fast you should or shouldn't be driving in that area if you want to avoid getting a ticket. Now, when you think about it that way, you can start to see is that those internal and external KPIs, they are going to have somewhat of a relationship between the two. Meaning, if you're looking at the speed limit and the speed limit is 35 miles an hour on the road that you're on, but you're driving 60, what that tells me is you're way over the speed limit and you're probably going to set yourself up for a potential, I guess you'd say, unnecessary stop if the police catch you going that fast in that zone. And so you want to pay attention to both the internal KPIs and the external KPIs. So let's break that down and how that actually relates to your law firm. Now, when you're thinking about your law firm, you're going to have both the internal and the external KPIs. So let's talk about a couple of the internal KPIs. So some of the internal KPIs for your law firm are going to be things like your revenue, or things like the amount of cash that is coming in. That's going to help us understand how much cash is actually coming into your firm. Maybe we look at your expenses. How much cash is going out the door? What are you buying? And then we can look at things like the number of cases. We also want to look at things like the number of leads that you have coming in, and also things like productivity. Are the staff or are the legal staff members working on the actual cases? Those types of things will help you start to understand what is happening in your firm, because similar to any other way you look at KPIs, is they're going to help give you a good understanding of what is happening in your firm. Now, you're also going to have some other KPIs that you want to pay attention to. You want to pay attention to things like the tax deadlines. Those are not ones that you can control, but you better comply with them or it's going to create other issues. You also want to pay attention to some of the professional and the ethics standards, the rules from the state bar. If you don't pay attention to those, it could create other issues, but they may have deadlines, they may have different requirements. Those type of indicators or KPIs are going to be important for you. Now, when you're thinking about it for your firm, there are tons of things that you can pay attention to. Just like that example with if you're driving in the car. But one of the things we want to understand is different KPIs will matter more or less depending on the situation. So let's say if you're about 100 miles away from your destination, but your fuel light starts flashing. When that indicator is going off, what that tells me is that is probably the most important indicator for you because you are 100 miles away. And if you run out of fuel now, you're gonna be stuck and stranded. So at that moment, that indicator or that KPI is probably more important than your other KPIs. So as you're navigating through running your law firm, you do have to understand, depending on where you are in your journey, that will give you an idea of which KPIs will matter more to you. The KPIs that matter today may not always be the ones that you need to monitor and that you need to keep up with. Those will change over time. And to help you understand that, I want to walk through a few examples. So let me pull up some of the questions that you guys have sent in. And let's look at the first one. So the first question someone asked was, hey, I'm just starting out my firm, like really early, really starting out. And I hear all this talk about KPIs. What KPIs should I be paying attention to? If you're in the early stages of starting out, one of the things that I would say is some of the KPIs you probably want to keep in mind is definitely your compliance one. So think about those external KPIs like your tax deadlines, any deadlines that the state bar sets or any requirements that the state bar has for you, like the number of CLEs, like those types of things, because you want to make sure that you don't create a compliance issue for yourself down the road. And to be honest with you, in the earlier days, that's probably the easiest time for you to get the process in place to make sure those compliance things are taken care of. So as you grow, you won't have that issue to think about later on. Another area you want to look at it's going to be your expenses, because when you're early on, you really have to optimize the amount of money that you have. You may have limited amounts of cash and you really want to prioritize and say, are we spending our money in the places that make the most sense? For example, you probably don't want to be spending a ton of money on the types of things that you can probably wait until later. For example, if you're early on, you probably need to spend some money on the essential software. Maybe it's not time for you to go buy the most elaborate version of the software, or maybe it's not time for you to go buy that $50,000 website because you're just getting started. You want to keep an eye on what are the things that are the most relevant for my firm if I am just starting out. And then something else you want to keep in mind are the number of new cases. You want to track that almost religiously because you need to make sure you have enough casework coming in so that you can make financial sense of your business. Because if you don't have cases, you won't have revenue, which means you won't be able to continue operating your firm. Now, the next one someone asked is, I'm in the mode where we're a little bit more established, but we're hiring more associates. So this firm is probably around $2 million and they're looking to bring on more associates. So if you are looking to bring on more associates, a couple of things that I think you should think through is, first is going to be case volume. You want to make sure that you have enough cases for your legal team to actually work on. Now, if you're trying to bring on more associates and you're not really paying attention to that, chances are you might bring them on too early, because you want to start looking at that to say, okay, all right, how many cases do we have? For the attorneys we already have, how many cases is each attorney working on? And how many cases should an attorney be able to support? Because when you start thinking about it that way, it'll give you an idea of when should we actually start to bring this new attorney in, or it'll tell you how many cases do we need to make sure that we can keep this new attorney productive and actually busy doing the right type of legal work. Another thing you want to look at is cash collections. See, this is where a lot of law firms start to really miss it because they're looking at, hey, we're doing all this legal work, we're getting all this stuff done, but they're not looking and monitoring, are we actually collecting the payments for the legal work that we are doing? Now, if no one is really following up, making sure that you are actually collecting for the legal work that is being done, what you will end up happening is you will run into a cash problem because you're going to have to keep paying your staff because they're doing the legal work. You're going to have to keep paying all the operating expenses. But if you're not actually collecting from your customers, eventually your cash is going to run out. So it is very important for you to recognize you need to do the legal work, you need to bill your clients, and you need to make sure you are actually collecting the payments. The other thing that I would definitely start to really pay attention to is your customer reviews. Because as you start to add more associates and more attorneys on, what is going to happen is you as the partner or you as the owner of the firm, you are going to have less of a direct hand in the individual cases. And what you want to make sure is all of your legal staff is still delivering a quality level of service that lives up to the brand of your firm. Because here's what ends up happening a lot of times is the attorney who started the firm is a great attorney, knows how to manage their reputation, knows how to deliver for the clients, and they get great reviews. And then they bring on associates who aren't that invested in the results of the firm. These associates, they don't really take to heart the discipline of making sure that they are doing the best thing for the clients as the owner would, because the owner has more of a reputation at stake. And if you're not keeping an eye on what are your customer views, what are the customer feedback, customers could be having a bad experience and you won't know until they just start leaving or until bad reviews actually encourage people to leave your firm or people to avoid hiring your firm for legal services. So you want to pay attention to that. Now, the last section I want to talk about was someone sent in a question. They're in a law firm where they're in a growth mode, meaning they're probably north of $5 million and they're like, hey, we got the compliance in place, we got the right staffing in place, we got a good rhythm about getting clients in the door. Now we're ready to really grow and take things to the next level. So when you're looking at your law firm at that stage, it really comes down to, are we really maximizing the use of our resources, whether that's financial or whether that's human resources or technology? So some of the things that I would say we want to look at are going to be things like your average monthly revenue. First, what that's going to tell me is, are we actually on track to hit the revenue targets that we're aiming for? So what you can do is you can take whatever your annual target is, divide it by 12 months, and then you can divide it down to a weekly basis to give you an idea to say, hey, we should be generating roughly this much money on a weekly basis if we are going to be moving in the right direction towards our goal. And if you notice that, hey, we're not generating that much money on a weekly basis, then you probably may need to make some adjustments. Or if you're in a business where you're probably doing like contingency or PI or some type of arrangement where you don't get your money on a like regular billing frequency, then you may want to look and say, okay, all right, what is our average revenue on a monthly basis? And are we on track to move towards the goal that we're aiming for? Another thing you want to look at is your cost of acquisition. See, when you're in growth mode, you're going to be spending a lot of money on marketing and branding and really getting the word out about your firm. You want to ask yourself, what does it cost us to attract a new customer or a new client? You want to keep an eye on that because that's going to help you understand, are you spending your marketing dollars wisely or are you just throwing money out the door? Because if you're not spending your marketing dollars wisely, what is going to happen is you're going to run into some cash flow problems. So you want to start looking at that. Now, a quick way, without getting into the deep details, a quick way to look at that is to take how much money have you been spending on your marketing and sales function over the last 6 months? How many new clients have you brought in over that same period of time? And if you divide those two numbers, it'll give you an idea on about how much it costs you to bring in a new client. You want to make sure you're monitoring that over time, because if that number starts increasing, you need to ask yourself, hey, what's going on here? Do we need to improve our marketing strategy? Do we need to tweak something? And then the last one I think you should really prioritize is going to be your employee ROI. Now, this is where you're looking at how much you are paying your staff compared to how much revenue are they generating. Because if your staff is working really hard and you're paying them, but they're not actually doing work on revenue generating things, what you're going to notice is you're still going to have to pay them, but the firm isn't getting paid from clients because they aren't doing billable work. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that. Now, if you're an hourly firm, it becomes very easy because you can just look at, what do I pay this staff member? How many billable hours are they doing? And then you can just do the math and just say the amount of revenue they generated divided by what they cost the firm. Now, you want to aim for about a 3x minimum multiple is what I would say. You want the revenue they generate to be about 3 times more than what they cost the firm. Because typically that allows you 1/3 goes to paying the staff, 1/3 goes to operational and administrative costs, and then 1/3 goes to profitability and covering taxes, those types of things. And when you think about it in general, that will put you in a good, healthy financial place. Now, on the other hand, if you're doing work where you're doing PI cases or contingency, where you may have to look at it slightly different. Now, a lot of times, firms that are doing like PI work, what you may have to do is just really look at your staffing as a whole and say, okay, for our legal staff, all the people who really do work on getting this case over the finish line and providing the legal service to this client, is you'd say, okay, what's the average revenue we're getting on these PI or contingency cases? About how much does the staff that works on these cases for the legal work, what do they cost? And then you can start to really understand, like, all right, what is our return on investment? Is the legal team actually generating enough revenue to give us at least a 3 times multiple? And then if you're using flat fee, maybe you have to use a slightly different approach, but it's similar to the contingency and the PI. Is you want to look at all the people who are working on those cases, and then you want to say, okay, how much revenue are we generating? And is it at least 3 times more than what the staff cost us? Now, that 3x is what the legal staff cost you. Now, if you're looking at those types of metrics, what it's going to do is it's going to give you an indicator. Are you headed in the right direction based on the phase of your business that you are in? So if you are looking for the specific KPIs that are the most relevant for your business, you'd really want to work with your CFO and really ask and have a conversation about what is our goal, what are we aiming for, and what KPIs are the most important for this phase. So thanks for tuning in to another episode of Fix My Firm. Continue to send in your questions because we're going to be making more and more content to really address topics that are important to you in running your law firm, and we're going to be answering your questions. So until next time.